Welcome back to Exploring Growth Podcast. So excited that you are joining us again. Today, my guest is Steffen Hedebrandt from dreamdata.io. And we had a robust conversation about building the proverbial house of revenue attribution for B2B mid-market companies. If this is you, you're a B2B mid-market, and you guys are having trouble connecting the dots on revenue attribution, this is the episode for you. Steffen, thanks for joining me on Exploring Growth Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Lee.
So I'm excited to have Steffen here today from dreamdata.io, CMO. And, you may, if you've been following my episodes, you may remember I interviewed Laura from Dream Data, who's one of their sales development reps. And we had a great conversation about attribution for B2B. And so today I'm privileged to talk with their CMO and talk, more to a marketer, right? And it was interesting to hear what Laura had to say from a sales perspective, because, this topic that we're talking about is so intertwined with marketing and sales. That conversation has to be aligned for enablement of both sides. So that was such an interesting take to talk with her. But now on the marketing side, I thought that maybe we could spend our time today thinking about that mid-market B2B company, revenue 10 to 100 million, and the buying cycle being maybe roughly 3 to 9 months, right? And it's funny, I think a lot of companies probably don't even know how long their buying cycle is, but we know, like that's, and you actually even have some data you were sharing with me earlier, that time frame is typical for a larger sale B2B. So with that time frame in mind and that type of company in mind, let's talk about setting up revenue attribution, or kind of building the proverbial house of attribution for a company. A lot of times when I go in and meet with clients, they either have a team that's kind of disorganized, and they aren't sure why things aren't working. And so it's either that or I come into a company that is strong, heavy on building brand now that they've been doing sales specifically, and they want to push a lot of marketing out, a lot of marketing campaigns to start driving new quality inbound leads for their salespeople to support them. And in doing that, they just are kind of clueless when it comes to attributing success up the pipeline from, they may be doing it well in the sales pipeline, but as we look up the funnel to marketing, it's kind of not there. So I thought maybe you could kind of walk us through, the building blocks of how should they be thinking, what's the mindset, and then what are some of the first things they should be doing to set the foundation?
Yeah, thank you, Lee. Good question. I think there's probably there's many paths here, but if let's start with a simpler path, which is like, what are things you can do without a lot of technology available? I think that's a good place for start, because most companies don't necessarily have budget or like skills to do more technical things. So
that's right.
Like start into like enforcing that the salespeople always ask the question. So how did you hear about us? Where did you meet us? Where did you come from? And make sure that, like, if they're using a calling software, they will already be logged. If they're not, then at least type it into the CRM. What did this person actually reply when you asked this at the meeting or on the sales call? Just to start getting some anecdotes about what seems to be leaving an impact. The same thing is that, like, this more and more popular kind of how did you hear about us form fill on where you book your calls. Also makes a lot of sense. It's super low cost to implement, and you can catch some signals of what's working. I would say then the problem is then that most people don't remember how they like got into like your world, but at least
by the time they get there.
But at least they can give you an anecdote of what they think that led you there. So I would say like these two like easy, accessible tricks on the meeting. Ask them where they submit their forms. You can ask them as well, and that starts giving you a glimpse of what's going on. when we tested this ourselves, particularly the form fill, we could see that when we compared their answer to what it said in Dream, that there was quite a big discrepancy, and also it's what you catch in the forms can sometimes be a bit too vague to act upon. So like if somebody writes Google, then it's okay. Was it an ad? Was it an organic? Which ad was it, or which blog post, or what did you search for? All these questions are not answered. So the great self-reported answer can be a bit of a unicorn sometimes to come across. But nevertheless, this is completely free to use, and you can start that out today.
Then right. I like that. It's kind of like an old school approach, you know, and I think that aligns with what I tell my clients to do when they're building their marketing strategy, when they're building out picture of their ideal buyer, in that you first look at your customer base and say, who are we currently dealing with that we want more of?
Yeah.
Because you don't have all perfect customers. So which ones make the right sense? We have a good product market fit. And, we could sign these up and do really well for them. And we would create, sort of a snowball effect. And so then that gives you information about who to talk to, and then going out and getting that feedback. And I love that's where you started, because I feel like the secret sauce to marketing is customer feedback or buyer feedback out in the wild before they become customers. The more you can know about what they're thinking and what they need, the more you can meet them where they are and pull them towards a solution in an effective, value-driven way. So I think that's a great start, to building a foundation is hey, it's kind of funny, like so simple, just go ask.
Yeah. You actually highlighted one more thing you can do. You can just take your current customer base and write this question to them one by one and see like kind of what is the aggregate data. So on your website, in meetings, and then you could also just send an email to everybody. Like, where did you hear about us? That will get you off to a good start, I would say.
I like that. And so what I would ask now is like question about mindset. So, I always try to make sure my clients are have the right mind about what they're doing so that they're committed to it. So we're not talking about tactics. We're talking about, a long-term commitment to something that's going to, put fuel on the fire towards your vision of how you're trying to grow your company and why. So tell me a little bit about how they should be thinking when it comes to attribution.
Yes. And I think, like, funnily enough, I think attribution is a fundamental way of thinking about marketing and growth of a company in general, because in B2B, you don't just get a deal in the door out of nowhere. It's a result of multiple actions leading towards creating awareness, interactions, sales meetings, and then maybe legal process before somebody signs. So that means that we can't just get another customer tomorrow unless we start doing something 6 months before tomorrow. And so
for sure,
there's a kind of a cause and effect relationship you need to establish. And my interest for attribution comes from like a desire for winning. like if I can understand when we won 100 customers last year, which path did they take? Are there any of these paths that looks like I can replicate them? Like, is it this ad campaign always? Then I want to do more of this ad campaign, or is it this piece of content or this type of content? Well, let's develop more of it. So let's try to understand what are the things that we can repeat and then expect a positive outcome. And now,
and even
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
We released these benchmarks last year that said like from first touch to a deal being won amongst our customers is 192 days.
Okay.
So, if you need to be 1 or 2 quarters upfront with marketing before the revenue needs to come in your company. And this you need to, like, it would be nice if the organization intuitively knew that this is how it connects. But I think let's just take that responsibility on us as marketers to explain people that things take time. If we have a Q3 target, of sales, then in Q1 and Q2 we need to do a lot of marketing because the salespeople are going to need this demand by Q3 or even in Q2.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, having that mindset so that you can commit to the 192 days. And I think Laura and I talked about that a little bit. Because I gave her this challenge of, if you're, a CMO for a B2B company for 100 days, what would you do? And it's like, well, you would do a lot, but it wouldn't amount to a lot because you still got 92 days to go.
Yeah, I would do
so.
You need to
let's speak to that.
Let's say you need to establish kind of a framework for like leading indicators and lacking indicators that your work actually has a good impact. And the lacking indicator is like the deal gets signed. That's the best thing we can see. And then you want to work your way backwards in the process to say, what are some of the earlier signals that we're on the right path? Typically, I think like a booked demo call is a great earlier indicator. If it's not leading, then it's at least, it's not one, it's quite early in the journey still. And it should be pretty good that we get demo calls booked, and then we can monitor the quality of the demo calls that gets booked. And then that must be an indication that we're building some momentum that can close 2, 3, 4 months later on.
Yeah. And I think too, like applying that same type of strategy of asking, how did you find us? Applying that to the demo call and asking them, how did you end up here? A simple question of, how did you go from where you were to this call?
Yeah.
Doing that more and more on the interactions that you're having. And I think they don't have to be even personal one-to-one on a call interactions. They could be in the comment section somewhere or an email. How did you end up here? Where were you before this? Just a simple question and answer is going to inform you up the funnel, so you don't have to wait all the way to the very end where there's a sale made.
Yeah, completely agree. And like, if you want to get a little bit more like theoretical about how to do growth and marketing, then ideally you would want to have like a small committee meeting in your team or in your company one time per month or even by week or something like that, where you write down what are all the ideas we have that we could start doing in terms of marketing and growth.
Yeah.
And then you would like systematically score them on 2, 3, 4 factors. And then you'd pick the ones that are kind of probably the easiest but the highest impact. And then you'll write down the dates of when do we start executing on these things. Because then, like, once metrics start to get impacted by this, you would know, okay, all things being equal, we started this experiment on this day, and now a week later we see, there's an uptick in demo calls. You know what I mean? So like, you can do a lot of things just by being structured about, on this day we started X and the next day we saw this. You might not have the statistical evidence, but you know that I started this activity today and tomorrow this happened.
Yeah. I mean, I think if we're trying to build a house here, we've got the foundation in terms of how to think properly. And as we start building the walls, that's really what it sounds like you're talking about is, it's having a framework for how you operate and employing that framework. So, it's just tracking as a more of a behavior, right? It's more of like building that into the natural rhythm of how your team operates to say, no, this is a priority, and that now we need to track. So even if it's a spreadsheet and dates, along the top with your 3 tactics or 3 things that you want to do, that's fine, because at least now you're starting to build that into how you operate. And you can get more fancy. You can always get more fancy, but I love that, you guys sell attribution software, and you're telling people to like go old school, like start somewhere, right? Just open up a spreadsheet and ask people how they get there.
Yeah,
start working towards that.
I can easily get into a dream data pitch, but I would like, it's much more tangible to do. Like it's an easier place to start for sure.
For sure. Yeah. I think that's very wise. And it will set the tone for future attribution that's more complicated. And I like that. So I like that we're building into this conversation feedback loops, because this is something I push a lot. You really want to have that to be a mechanism of how you get more accurate insights, so that when we're actually going to run this experiment or run this test on these three things, that we're actually going to get good quality data back. So I think we've got a good solid, like, framed up house now. From here, where would you say they need to go? So let's say, the team, they've listened to everything you've said. They've got the right mindset. They're starting to track. They're deploying a few things. What's next?
Yeah. Yeah, then I think the next, if we're going to this kind of trackable growth, then the next thing is to think about, or even say, as you start being structured about how you do these things, then you also not need to build a narrative that you tell your team and your organization. Like, we started these things. These are the sort of early signals we see. So people start to understand this correlation between the marketing team is doing these things, and they start to see these outcomes. So, like, just the next soft thing is like, what is the narrative that we're like believing in here? And then once you have the narrative, then next step is then, okay, how can we provide evidence that what we're saying is true? And then even here, I would still allow you to go soft first, like start with some qualitative evidence, like take screenshots of interactions on LinkedIn, or the last touch of a demo call that converted was a Google search ad, or stuff like that. So you start to like warm up the organization that here's proof that marketing works. And then with all that done, then you can go into a more like data advanced setup, like Dream Data or similar solutions.
Yeah, I like the idea of the screenshot as an example, because it provides a visual to the kind of loosey-goosey narrative that is being thrown around. And maybe if the team is not used to tracking things, I think it can be overwhelming. It can seem kind of a big thing to bite off. And it can also make people feel a little uncomfortable that now you're going to start holding them accountable, right, to what they're doing, instead of just putting out feel good, ads on Facebook or running, PPC campaigns. Now you're diving into it a little bit more. And I think there can be some fear that comes out of that. So those screenshots as a specific example are good, because it shows like, okay, here's an example of what we did and how it worked. And it should empower those team members to want to do more like that, or do it better. So then they can attach themselves to this new goal, this new version of success that they're shooting for. And they then it becomes more about what they're gunning for, instead of it being something that they don't really want to play in.
Yeah, and I think like nobody should be tracking just for the sake of tracking. You should be doing it because you want to positively impact your business and trying to understand what's working here or what's not working. So we can stop doing the things that are not working and like keep putting more eggs into the baskets of what's working.
So let's say that they've done all this, and now they are starting to actually get some data in, and maybe it's gone beyond the spreadsheet. Maybe they've installed Google Analytics. They're seeing more real-time data, and maybe not quite at the Dream Data level yet, but they're starting to see analytics come in. What should they be thinking about next?
So I think that's actually a good corner just to turn as well, is that like think about making sure that as much as possibly can leaves behind digital reflections. So there is data if you want to deep dive into analysis. So a few examples can be, if you do all your customer success work in like a Gmail inbox right now, you might want to change that up with a real customer success software so it leaves behind digital traces. Or if the
Right. Yeah.
salespeople are just, dialing with their phone, not using any tools, maybe like force them to call through HubSpot or AirCall or whatever they're
Yeah.
doing.
So it
So
can be tracked.
yeah,
Yeah.
so you can see like on this day we did an outbound experiment where we called 100 customers. It was these customers we connected with 25% of them. I got 2 yeses, and that's so in all kinds of go-to-market activities. You can probably enforce that it leaves behind some digital trace as well. And then when you've gone through that exercise, I think what you should be striving for is then to build the connection between your activity and at best the deals you've won, or at least deals that reached a certain pipeline stage, because that's what matters in B2B. Like we're in B2C, marketing can run marketing, and then you have a website that sells running shoes, and then you sell running shoes, and then that feedback loop is quite tight. But us B2B marketers, we have to be patient, and we have to observe that it actually goes through the sales pipeline and the contracts get signed in the end. And that's our scorecard. That's new business. That's sales pipeline. There's nothing else that matters. Like, I'm sorry to say it, but like you do marketing activities to produce sales pipeline. And that also means like you can be doing the best of marketing in the world, but if the salespeople do not pick up the phone, if they don't write to the leads that you produce, then though you may produce great marketing, it's worth nothing for the company, or at least close to zero, because no revenue was won from this.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because just I think the previous episode I had Joe Pesci, who's a world-renowned sales trainer, and we talked all things sales, and that was one of his major things too. Is like your salespeople need to know what to do with these leads, because you've done all this work and now it's for naught, and then you the marketing team ends up looking bad, and that's the age-old infighting that we have. What it makes me think as you're talking, I'm thinking of all these things. I'm writing notes down here. I think after let me say it like this. I think that practically speaking, the progress for tracking your success as a marketing team should be first about tracking the progress of building your framework of how you're going to track, so that you start to have success. Like if I want to build if I want to get stronger and build muscle, well, first of all, I need to know the right workouts. I need to have a time that I work out every day. I need to start tracking the progress of actually getting out there, showing up, and being there, and awkwardly moving the weights, until I kind of, okay, I've got a rhythm of how this works. It's in my day and it's working, and I've kind of hit the first phase. Now I can actually start to track progress of building muscle. I think it's the same thing for attribution. You got to start building somewhere. So track the progress of your build, that to get to where you can actually track, success. And I'd say parallel with that, I would say probably day one, marketing needs to have a conversation with sales and tell them what they're doing, and say, okay, look, we're turning over a new leaf here. We want to know, the efforts we're putting in matter, and we're behind this. So we don't have a full clue of what we're doing, but we're going to start building something, and we're going to let you know. And that starts the rhythm of the sales and marketing alignment. So sales can say, yeah, okay, well, once you guys get your stuff together, maybe we can help out. And it starts that back and forth conversation. So as you're building and you get to the level of screenshots, you can share those with the sales team and say, hey, we're getting further along and building our thing here. And look, let me show you what we did and what it amounted to.
Yeah.
Are you seeing anything on your side? That starts a real conversation of feedback loop between marketing and sales. And so I think that warming up that sales alignment conversation is important. So it's not just you turn it on and say, well, we sent you all these leads, and what did you do with them?
Yeah, it's
right?
crucial.
Yeah.
I mean, like, yeah, if you are to start anywhere, just like walk into the sales room physically or digitally, and then ask, who do you like to have in those customer meetings? How do they look like? Yeah. And then go back into the marketing room and figure out a way to like get them more of those people that they like talking to. If
there ever was a way to hold salespeople's feet to the fire, that's the way.
Yeah.
Hey, you tell me who you want us to bring you, and we'll go work on trying to do that. then when they show up there, there's really no excuse to not follow up with them and not do the work of closing.
It sounds overly simple, but it's extremely powerful to like go in and ask, who should we try to sell to? Okay, let me go get you some of these. Okay, he converted. Why didn't you speak to him? Or you did speak to him and win. I'll just try to, double the budget on this campaign that brought him in.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And as I have lots of notes here and like lots of things kind of popping in my mind as we're talking. And if we kind of continue on this, this narrative of building the proverbial attribution house, we end up at the roof. Like, how would we put a cap on this? And I'm going to throw something out there just to, you tell me if you agree with it or don't agree with it, and then let's figure out how can we really bring this full circle for them so they can have this full idea of how to think about attribution. So my thought is, ultimately, you want to be able to report up to the C-suite. You want to report up to the board of directors and let them know this would be like the real goal to get to say, okay, not only do we have a real good handle on what we're doing, but we're tracking everything we can track. We're seeing what's working. This is what's working. And you're not necessarily giving them the minutia, but you're giving them these high kind of pillar metrics. And the way I advise my clients is to look at two major kind of umbrella metrics that are not really metrics at all. They're really more modes of mechanisms in which the other metrics fall below. One of them is volume, because every company wants to have more, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean exponentially more, but are we incrementally or exponentially growing the number of everything coming through the funnel, including opportunities closed? And the other one being sort of this, the speed at which those new leads are flowing through to sales and then even through the sales pipeline themselves. So for me, I feel like as we get close to sort of buttoning this up, I would say now that you're looking at all this data and getting now what you didn't know before, so you're more informed of how to use the tools, and maybe now you're at a dream data stage where you can use really good qualified tools. You have to now push up the right narrative and numbers to leadership. So I'd be curious to hear what you think about that thinking and how you guys think about it.
I think it's a good way of thinking about it, Lee. I think, to be successful in marketing is one thing is that you constantly explain the organization, why you're doing things, because you need to be assigned budgets, you need to have like buy-in that it's working. And then I would say a good thing to report on would probably be to explain as much as you can of the pipeline to your whoever you're reporting to. So let's say you have like this classic, you have an outbound team and they book some meetings. They would probably know kind of somewhat the percentage of how much of the pipeline did they bring in. Then of the rest of the pipeline, how much of this can you say is fair to like prescribe to marketing? And like you want to have that, if not growing faster than sales, then at least keeping up with the sales of how many outbound meetings is getting booked, and constantly improving, if not percentage wise, then at least the amount of leads that you bring in, and then the value of the leads that you bring in. And maybe one last component I really advise anybody to think about as well is how much are you willing to pay for a lead or a deal that you source. Typically, the answer is pretty crisp. If you ask the outbound department, hey, we booked 100 meetings last week, we have 4 employees doing it, their salary is this, hence a meeting cost this.
Yes.
Too few marketing teams have actually established what is our target cost per acquisition. So by establishing this, you have like a metrics where you can say, are we below or above the target? If we're below what we're willing to pay, then we should actually be funneling in more money to marketing. Or at least if you compare sales and marketing one-on-one, And if they were equal, I would pour much more money into marketing, because you don't see all the seeds that you plant, all the other people that are hit by your marketing. Whereas you have one converted demo call, but maybe another 5,000 people actually saw the brand. Whereas in outbound, it's this kind of one-on-one poke that you're doing, and it's not leaving a lot of spillover effect on your brand.
Right.
So do have the conversations in your team. What can we afford to pay for a certain business outcome?
Yeah, I like that. Very important. And it's a conversation that's going to come up. If it doesn't come up day one, which I don't think is answerable day one in this scenario, but I think if they kind of follow this this path that we've sort of outlined here, they're going to, in due time, probably months, arrive at a place where they have data of some sort that they can then ask the question of the sale and say, of the information we can gather now, how can we attribute up the pipeline, not only the success and the path, but the percentage of what was spent or what we should now budget for doing these things again. And I think, again, back to the setting up, like establishing or tracking the progress of the build is very important for leadership, because then it's not something that's in a dark hole somewhere that you're just saying words. It's more of like, let me be transparent as a marketing leader to my management about what we're building and how we're building it, and you give them insight. So once you actually have it built to a large degree, they're going to feel like they have part ownership. I think that's great. And I would add one more thing. And this is, I'm just adding this there because I think it's on my mind. And I want to add as much value to whoever's listening here, if they're taking notes. And I love conversations like this, by the way, because it allows us to pack a lot of information into, 30 minutes or whatever it is. So people can come back and listen to it over and over again.
We're trying to share all the mistakes that we've done so they don't have to.
Yeah, exactly. But I think one major misstep that could happen is not, it's, first of all, it's having a marketing leader that understands all of this, because the speed in which you're going to actually build something and get to success from a marketing attribution standpoint is that's the difference. It may be 192 days, or it may be 654. If you have a leader that is not as experienced in this domain. So I would say having the right marketing leader is critical from day one. So if you're kind of like, we need to redo all this because we don't know what's happening with our marketing budget, search for a marketing leader who can come in and not only lead a team, and hopefully think strategically too, but already has experience and maybe has even worked with some software like this that has the thinking in place, because then they can come in and stair step and say, okay, leadership, we need 192 days to even do anything. Yeah. And here's what we're going to do in the first 192 days. We're going to build this out. That's going to give so much peace of mind to leadership. It's also going to affect so much more success throughout the team. And they're going to play well with sales. I think that's a critical component that, if missed, because a lot of people have a marketing leader and they don't know what they don't know about how that person should be judged. Right. Yeah. I mean, you sort of sit in that role yourself. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about it. I mean, you're kind of in that hot seat.
Yeah, I would say I wouldn't want to have a marketing leader who was not talking about pipeline and revenue, because then I would get worried that the focus is not in the right place. I think like fundamentally the talk track should be about, we're doing these things because we want more high quality leads for the salespeople, or we want our company to produce more revenue. And if there's a complete disconnect between what is the marketing project and revenue outcome, then that would be a big red flag for me.
Yes. Hey, I appreciate it so much. This has been a great conversation, very rich for, especially for the company we're talking about. I think if someone comes across this or listening to it, they're going to get so much from it. So I really appreciate your time and joining me and talking through this.
Thank you, Lee. Me too. We definitely think alike on many of these topics.
So if I'm going to link your LinkedIn below, of course, dreamdata.io, is there any other place that if someone wanted to find you, they could?
No, that would be the two main entities to go through. All of us are pretty active on LinkedIn, so we'll answer any question people might have.
That's great. All right. Thanks a lot.
See you.
Thanks again for watching Exploring Growth Podcast. I want to do something a little different this time. If you don't know about the email that summarizes and follows all these podcast episodes that has even more rich information on it for you, if you're not on that, go to harvardmurray.com and then click on podcast. And right there'll be a little subscription box. Just put your email address in there, hit subscribe. You won't be disappointed.